Before the show starts, drop a comment below with where you're watching from. Then sit back, relax, and get ready for some chilling stories. I moved into the apartment complex on a crisp October afternoon, ready for a fresh start. The building was old but well maintained, with vintage fixtures and hardwood floors that creaked underfoot. It had character, something I'd been craving after years of soulless high-rise living. The first week was uneventful. I worked late, kept to myself, and only occasionally saw my neighbors in the hall. There was a young couple across from me, a woman with a toddler downstairs, and an elderly man in the unit above mine. I met him briefly in the hallway one morning. Mr. Holloway, he introduced himself. He had thinning white hair, wore a pressed sweater, and had that careful, deliberate way of speaking that some older people have. "You work late," he noted, smiling. "Saw you coming in around 11 last night. Must be a busy job." I nodded, not thinking much of it. "Yeah, long hours. Keeps me out of trouble." He chuckled. Good. It's nice to have someone steady in the building. We've had all kinds here." There was something about the way he said it that stuck with me, but I brushed it off. A few nights later, I woke up to the sound of heavy footsteps above me. Not just the occasional creak, but full pacing, back and forth, slow and steady. I glanced at my phone. 2:12 a.m. I sighed, rolled over, and tried to ignore it. The next morning, as I left for work, I ran into the building's maintenance guy, Carl, in the lobby. "Hey Carl," I said, "does Mr. Holloway have trouble sleeping? I hear him walking around at weird hours." Carl gave me a confused look. "Mr. Holloway?" "Yeah, upstairs. Apartment 6B. Carl hesitated. "There's no one in 6B. It's been vacant for months." I blinked. "No, that's not right. I met him, white hair, sweater, talks real polite." Carl scratched his head. "Man, I don't know what to tell you. I got the keys to that unit. No one's rented it yet." I laughed awkwardly. Maybe I'm hearing things. Carl shrugged and went back to his work. I headed to my car, trying to shake off the weirdness. That night, I double-checked the lock on my door before heading to bed. I wasn't scared exactly, just uneasy. At 2:14 a.m., I woke up again. The footsteps were louder this time. Slow, deliberate pacing directly above me. I stared at my ceiling, heart pounding. I had a sudden, horrible thought. If the apartment was empty, who's walking up there? I lay frozen, listening. Then, a different noise. A faint scraping sound, like something shifting against metal. I sat up, scanning the room in the dim glow from my alarm clock. The sound was coming from above me. My eyes locked onto the ceiling vent, just a few feet from my bed. The metal grate was slightly ajar. That wasn't like that before. I stared, breath shallow. For the first time, I noticed something chilling. The vent wasn't just any air duct. It was big, bigger than normal, big enough for someone to crawl through. The scraping sound came again, and this time I swore. Something moved inside the vent. I bolted out of bed, grabbed my phone, and turned on the flashlight. I aimed the beam at the vent. Silence. The dust on the metal frame looked disturbed, smudged, as if fingers had pressed against it. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next morning, exhausted but determined, I went to the building manager's office. I needed answers. "Listen," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I need to check something. Can you show me the lease records for 6B? The manager, a tired-looking woman named Linda, frowned. "Why?" "Because I met a man who says he lives there," I said. "But maintenance says it's empty." Linda's face paled slightly. She pulled up the records on her computer. "There hasn't been a tenant in 6B for over a year," she said. "Not since Mr. Holloway." I felt a chill crawl up my spine. "Wait, Mr. Holloway?" She nodded. "Yeah, the old landlord. Used to own the place. Sold it off, and well, he had issues. Paranoia, that kind of thing. Thought people were sneaking into his apartment, watching him through the vents." I swallowed hard. "Where is he now?" Linda sighed. "Disappeared after he sold the building. No forwarding address. Some people say he never really left, though." I stared at her, stomach twisting. I knew what I had to do. That night, I set up my phone to record, propping it up on my dresser, aimed directly at the ceiling vent. I turned off the lights, climbed into bed, and pretended to sleep. Waiting. At exactly 2:17 a.m., I heard it, the slow scrape of metal. Then, the vent cover shifted, ever so slightly. My blood turned to ice. I forced myself to stay still, breathing slow and steady. The camera was rolling. I needed proof. Then, a shadow moved behind the vent. I couldn't see details, just a faint outline, a shape, a presence, watching me. I squeezed my eyes shut, gripping the sheets. Minutes passed. Then the vent cover slowly slid shut. I didn't sleep. I didn't move. When the sun rose, I grabbed my phone with shaking hands and checked the recording. And what I saw made my stomach drop, because for 5 full minutes, in the dead of night, the vent was open, and a pair of eyes stared down at me. The moment I saw the recording, I knew I couldn't stay there another night. My body was frozen, my mind racing, but one thought was crystal clear. I wasn't alone in that apartment. I needed to get out. Keeping my eyes on the vent, I grabbed my keys and phone. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped them. I bolted for the door, barely stopping to slip on my shoes, and yanked it open. The hallway was dead silent, the air thick, suffocating. As I stepped out, I hesitated. A noise. Soft. Slow. A creaking sound from inside my apartment, like weight shifting on the floor. I turned back just in time to see something that nearly made my heart stop. The vent cover, the one that had been slightly ajar, was now wide open, and something inside moved. I ran. I don't even remember locking the door behind me. I just sprinted down the stairs, past the dimly lit hallway, past the empty front desk, and into the freezing night air. My breath came in ragged gasps as I fumbled for my phone, dialing 911 with shaking fingers. The police arrived within minutes. I met them outside, still breathless, trying to explain everything. The video, the noises, the man I had met who wasn't supposed to exist. They didn't say much, just nodded, hands on their radios, before heading inside. I waited. My pulse pounded in my ears. Then, after what felt like forever, one of the officers came back out. His face was unreadable. "We searched your apartment. No signs of forced entry," he said. "But we did find something in the vents." I swallowed hard. "What?" The officer hesitated. "A mattress, some old food wrappers, a few personal belongings." I felt sick. Who was living up there?" I stammered. The officer exhaled sharply. "That's the thing. No one's there now." "But," he looked at me, expression dark. "The dust inside those vents? It's been disturbed. Recently." I stared at him, my stomach twisting. Mr. Holloway had been watching me, and now he was gone. When I first moved into the house, I thought I had lucked out. It was a small rental in a quiet suburban neighborhood, nothing fancy but exactly what I needed. The street was lined with identical houses, well-kept lawns, and the occasional jogger passing by in the mornings. Peaceful. Safe. Or at least, that's what I thought. The first person to introduce himself was Greg, my next-door neighbor. He was in his late 40s, maybe early 50s, with thinning hair and a permanent grin that never quite reached his eyes. He showed up on my doorstep the day I moved in, holding a 6-pack of beer. "Welcome to the neighborhood, Lucas," he said, way too enthusiastic for a first meeting. Saw the moving truck and figured I'd come say hi. We don't get new folks around here often. I shook his hand, thanking him for the beer. He lingered on my porch a little too long, asking me question after question. Where I worked, if I lived alone, if I had family nearby. Harmless, I thought. Just a neighbor being friendly. But something about him felt off. Over the next few days, Greg was always around. Whenever I pulled into my driveway, he seemed to be outside, watering his lawn, checking his mailbox, just conveniently there. He always waved, always smiled. Then, he started mentioning things he shouldn't know. "Long day at work, huh?" he said one evening as I stepped out of my car. I hadn't told him what I did for a living. Another time, I went grocery shopping late at night, and the next morning, Greg casually mentioned how tough it can be to find good produce at the 24-hour market. I never told him where I shopped. I told myself I was overreacting. Maybe he was just observant. Maybe I was being paranoid. Then the little things started happening. One morning, I grabbed my mail and noticed some of the envelopes had been opened. Not torn, but carefully slid along the top. My trash cans were moved slightly out of place, like someone had gone through them. And then there was the night I woke up at 3 a.m. to a sound in my backyard. It was faint at first, just the wind rustling the leaves. But then, a creak, the unmistakable sound of my gate slowly swinging open. I held my breath, heart pounding. I moved carefully to my window and peered out through the blinds. Greg was standing in my yard, not walking, not doing anything, just standing there, facing my house. I felt my skin crawl. For a long moment, he didn't move. Then, as if he sensed me watching, he slowly tilted his head upward, just enough for the porch light to catch his face. And he smiled. I backed away from the window, my pulse racing. My first instinct was to call the cops, but what would I even say? My neighbor was standing in my yard. Instead, I did the next best thing. The next day, I installed security cameras. I told myself it was just for peace of mind, that I wouldn't even need to check the footage. I was wrong. The first night after installing them, I forced myself to review the recordings. Most of it was normal, cars passing by, a cat walking across the yard. Then, at 2:47 a.m., the motion sensor activated. Greg, standing outside my bedroom window. He didn't knock, didn't try to break in. He just stood there, watching, for 2 hours. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, all I could see was Greg standing outside my window staring. The thought made my skin crawl. By morning, I had convinced myself to go to the police. I took my phone, the footage queued up, and drove straight to the station. The officer at the front desk listened patiently as I explained everything. The open mail, the trash being moved, the backyard incident, the video. I placed my phone on the counter and pressed play, my hands still slightly shaking. He watched, expression unreadable. When the footage ended, he let out a slow breath and leaned back in his chair. "Look," he said carefully, "this is definitely creepy, but technically, he hasn't committed a crime. He didn't trespass, he didn't break anything, and he didn't threaten you." I stared at him. He stood outside my window for 2 hours in the middle of the night. The officer sighed. "I get it. I'd be freaked out too. But legally, there's not much we can do unless he actually tries something. Best I can tell you is to stay alert, document everything, and call us if things escalate." That wasn't the answer I wanted, but I had no choice. I drove home, my grip on the wheel tightening. That night, I triple-checked the locks. I kept my bedroom curtains shut. I even moved a chair in front of the door. Stupid, maybe, but it made me feel safer. At some point, I must have drifted off, because the next thing I knew, I was waking up to the sound of my front door opening. A slow, deliberate creak. I shot up in bed, my heart hammering. Silence. Then, a soft shuffle of footsteps. Inside the house, I reached for my phone, my fingers numb with fear. I pulled up the security camera feed. The front door was wide open, but no one was there. I forced myself to move. Holding my breath, I crept toward the door, gripping the nearest thing I could use as a weapon, a heavy flashlight from my nightstand. The living room was empty. So was the hallway. Then I noticed something. The picture frame from my nightstand, the childhood photo of me at age 5, was gone. Nothing else had been touched. No drawers rifled through. No valuables missing. Just that one photo. I stood there, every nerve in my body screaming. Then I heard it, a faint rustling outside. I turned toward the window, just in time to see movement on Greg's porch. A small object, taped to his front door. I didn't want to look. I had to. Slowly, I stepped outside, my stomach twisting. The paper fluttered slightly in the breeze. I reached up, peeled it off, and turned it over. My missing photo. But someone had written on the back, in thick, shaky letters, "I've always been watching." When I first moved into the apartment, I thought I had found the perfect place. It was an old building, recently renovated, with tall ceilings and beautiful wooden floors. The rent was surprisingly affordable, and my unit was on the top floor, meaning no noisy neighbors stomping above me. At first, everything was fine. Work kept me busy, and my nights were quiet. But after about a week, I started noticing sounds. It was subtle at first, a faint scratching noise, like something shifting behind the walls. I assumed it was just the old pipes, or maybe mice in the vents. It didn't bother me. Then one night, I woke up to something different. Breathing. Soft. Slow. Coming from the air vent above my bed. I lay there frozen listening. The sound was steady, rhythmic, too controlled to be an old pipe or a draft. It almost sounded human. I told myself I was imagining things. Maybe I had been dreaming. The next morning, I called the building's maintenance guy, Rick. When I told him about the noises, he just shrugged. "These old buildings make weird sounds," he said, barely paying attention as he checked the vent. "Nothing to worry about." I tried to believe him, but the sounds didn't stop. Over the next few nights, I started hearing faint whispers, just barely audible through the vent. I couldn't make out the words, but I knew they were there, low, murmuring voices just above me. And then one night, I heard my name. It was almost too quiet to be real, but I swear, I heard it. "Hannah." My blood ran cold. I sat up, heart pounding, staring at the vent. The room was silent now, except for my own shaky breathing. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next morning, I convinced myself I had imagined it. Stress. Sleep deprivation. It had to be something logical. But that was when I started noticing the other things. My bedroom closet, slightly open when I knew I had closed it. A drinking glass left on the counter when I was sure I had put it away. A faint smell of something unfamiliar in my apartment, like old dust and something else. Something stale. I started feeling like I wasn't alone. One night, after hearing a loud thud from the vent, I finally decided I needed to check for myself. I grabbed a screwdriver, climbed onto my bed, and started unscrewing the vent cover. My hands were shaking, but I forced myself to keep going. As I pulled the grate away, dust and small debris fell onto my bed. I held up my phone flashlight and aimed it inside. Something was in there. At first, I thought it was just a pile of insulation or trash. But as I reached in carefully, my fingers brushed against something solid. I pulled it out. A notebook. Small, tattered, the cover smudged with dirt. I flipped it open, and my stomach twisted. The pages were filled with handwriting, lists, notes, scribbled words. All about me. What time I left for work. What time I came home. What I ate for dinner. What I wore. Page after page, documenting my routines. Some of the entries were recent. Very recent. My hands went cold. Someone had been watching me. My hands trembled as I flipped through the notebook, each page making my stomach twist tighter. She left at 8:12 a.m. today. Wore the blue sweater again. She likes that one. Didn't eat much dinner. Seemed distracted. Maybe tired? She heard me tonight. I think she knows. That last sentence made my breath catch. My vision blurred as I stared at the words, my pulse hammering in my ears. I dropped the notebook like it was burning me. My mind raced. How long had someone been watching me? How did they even get inside the vents? I grabbed my phone and called 911, barely able to get the words out. The dispatcher told me to stay on the line, to wait outside if I felt unsafe. I was already out the door before she finished the sentence. The police arrived fast, 2 officers, 1 male, 1 female. They took the notebook, flipping through it with grim expressions. "Has anyone had access to your apartment recently?" The male officer asked. "Just maintenance," I said, my voice unsteady. "And I don't know. I keep my doors locked. I don't know how they got in." The female officer walked toward the open vent, shining her flashlight inside. "You said you heard noises coming from here?" I nodded. She crouched down, angling the light deeper. Then, after a beat, she said, "There's a space back here." My stomach lurched. "What do you mean?" She glanced at her partner. "This vent leads somewhere. Maybe a crawl space." They called for backup. A maintenance worker arrived with a set of old blueprints. The apartment building had originally been a hotel decades ago, and, hidden behind the walls, there were old and used maintenance shafts. One of them ran right behind my apartment, and it connected to another unit. An empty one. Apartment 3B hadn't been rented in years. The landlord claimed it was uninhabitable due to water damage, but the officers forced the door open anyway. The smell hit us first, damp, moldy, with something else underneath. Something rotten. Inside, the place was covered in dust. There was no furniture, no signs of anyone officially living there. But in the corner, just beneath a vent identical to mine, was a filthy sleeping bag. Empty food wrappers. A pile of clothes. And more notebooks. Stacks of them. Dozens, filled with pages upon pages of notes about me. But the worst part, the back window was open. Whoever had been there had already escaped. The police searched the building, but they never found him. They never figured out how long he had been living there. I moved out the next morning. But even now, in a new place, with new locks and security cameras, I still hesitate before going to sleep. Because sometimes, in the dead of night, I swear I hear it again. A whisper, coming from the vents.